Let's think about the title.
The
Why
title,
you've picked it.
yeah, yeah, why I picked it, I mean, I'm not sure I believe in it anymore, but it was certainly something I really believed in when I first started my practice. There are two elements to the title, and I think are important in my own journey on this. And I think, I'd like to bring people through a journey tonight as well, because I think it is important. Um, Dropping to the universal is a concept from a woman called Dorothy Heathcote, who was a drama facilitator up in the north of England. She's dead now, but she created this idea of working with actually quite difficult kids in schools who are difficult to teach, and she created the concept of dropping to the universal. She would teach maths using drama. I don't know how you do that. How do you do that?
That's incredible.
Right,
Mm.
but she did that, and the way she did it was this thing actually called dropping to universal, which was essentially to create a new learning environment that was underneath the subject matter. So she would find what she called the universal connections to learning and growth through the mathematics, through the particular lesson plan, get the kids into that, re-engage them with learning, growth, change, and then bring them back into the lesson plan.
Yeah.
It's phenomenally successful.
Sounds incredible to kind of short circuit the blocks to learning.
Really amazing, amazing stuff.
Mm.
And then the other bit of it is the traumatic woundings and the potential space. Potential space, for those some people will know, is a Winnicott term. So Donna Wood Winnicott was a child psychoanalyst and had been a paediatrician initially, and created a lot of central concepts that are still used today, like holding. Holding as a concept in therapy, you hold your client, not physically, but emotionally you hold them. That's his concept.
Mm-hmm.
He very much came up with that idea using what he saw as the natural elements of parenting. When a child is anxious, you pick them up and you hold them. And he talked about that. He used those images and metaphors very much. The potential space for him was this idea of the relationship between the child and the mum. Create this playful, creative, potential space in which personality emerges.
Mm.
And he said that that's what the therapist does with the client.
Yeah.
The therapist creates that potential space between themselves and the client so that things can emerge. The true self, as he called it, can emerge. The personality can emerge. So there's that. And then traumatic woundings, the notion that traumatic woundings can disrupt that. So dropping to the universal is coming underneath those blocks, the traumatic wounding, back into that, what I think of as a potential space, re-engaging with that relationship.
Mm.
Yeah? So
Yeah.
that's why I chose it. Okay. Before we get there, though, there's some practical stuff, isn't it? We were talking about beforehand. Sorry.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking about in terms of then when you have a client in front of you who has those symptoms of trauma, who's maybe violent, who's self-medicating.
Yeah.
You were saying like your strategy, your way of working has changed. You've got a very particular way of working now.
I used that stuff right at the beginning of my practice in Scotland when I was working in forensic settings. So working with some quite seriously dangerous people who were not going to be released unless they were shown to be safe, but who obviously did all of them, apart from a couple, carry baggage of trauma. Really did. That wasn't a justification for what they were doing, but a way of understanding, because we had to work through that stuff to get people to try and be safe. The idea was public safety. There was a lot at stake. Okay, so there was no. It was quite serious stuff, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
So it worked, but the problem is it does take a long time, and in the meantime, you've got people really hurting themselves or hurting other people, and that's the point about this forensic setting. That's the point I'm trying to make. That this stuff can lead to some very serious consequences. Trauma left untreated can lead to some very serious consequences. Soldiers coming back who are not diagnosed, who are not treated, who start self-medicating through, whose emotional regulation has been shot, literally has gone because they can no longer emotionally regulate themselves, so their anger is all over the place. They may be self-medicating, but then maybe explosively angry in the home, maybe hitting their children, scaring them, their partner, etc. These have very serious consequences. So there are some very important issues, as well as the psychic distress to the person experiencing the trauma. Now, loss of emotional management is a common symptom of trauma response. So maybe if I run through a couple of the basic tools of diagnosing trauma. So what are we looking at? What is trauma? Okay, so I showed you before. I've tried to be quite structured in this, because one of the things about trauma is it really messes you up.
Yeah, so you want to kind of contain yourself as you think about this, and contain us. Yeah.
So as a therapist, it's really important to be quite to be held, to be contained, to be cautious of things such as secondary trauma, which can affect the therapist. So if you're working in this field, it's very important to get support. It's very important to understand trauma symptoms and be monitoring yourself for them. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So it's symptoms that we might see in our clients and also in ourselves then.
And ourselves. So secondary traumatization and re-traumatization of the client. These are key concepts. So the two sort of major documents that you might turn to for diagnosis, and there are three major ones, but the two major ones, one is DSM-5, that much maligned book.
Yes.
The Diagnostic and Statistics Manual in the US. That's the US. In Europe, though, we use ICD-10, which is the European version of that. So both of these are diagnostic manuals that give you lists of symptoms, and they're quite useful as lists of symptoms. They don't give you a definition of a human person. They give you a list of some warning signals. You know, if you've got this list of stuff, there should be bells ringing in your head.
Okay.
Yeah? So they're quite useful for that, but it's not defining a person, as I say. So the type of things that DSM talks about is that as a therapist or as an assessment, if you think somebody might have post-traumatic stress, and now we say post-traumatic stress, not PTSD, because we understand that it's not really a disorder. It's a perfectly understandable response to repeated exposure to life-threatening or perceived to be life-threatening situations. Okay.
So that sounds really important that the D has dropped out of the label. Yeah.
I think for most of us, yeah, it's still there. I mean, it's still used, of course, but I wouldn't. Yeah, I see it as post-traumatic stress now. Also, partly because I think it's become so associated with soldiers. Actually, in my practice, and I know this, and it's part of the definition, PTS is very much part of children who experience trauma growing up, have all these symptoms of PTS, untreated PTS, that becomes chronic. Okay? So kids acting out in school, being violent, angry, aggressive, because that's one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
Right. Okay.
The school not getting it, they're excluded. I did a lot of work with street kids here in London, and many of these kids had massively traumatic childhoods. And what they were doing were just simply expressing symptoms of their trauma. As soon as it was recognised and we treated the trauma, these outbursts, these